think I'm going to record this with the window open because it's getting really warm in Sydney now and it's super sunny outside and my room is getting stuffy already. Hopefully that's not too loud, but whatever. Okay, so here's everything that I read in August. This month I read 5 books. I read 3 books that my boyfriend chose for me. I read 1 children's book and I read 1 absolutely shocking book for my book club. So this is kind of random, but I decided that a few months of this year I wanted to do themes for what books I was reading. In February I read 4 books with pink covers just because I'd started the month and I'd read 2 books with pink covers and then I was like, may as well keep this going. I also, since about January this year, I've really wanted to read only books with authors whose names are Rachel for October, which is my birth month. I think it's because I read Rachel Cusk. I read a book by her in January and I really liked it and it made me be like, wow, there are authors out there with my name who are really good. So in August I actually wanted to read only books from street libraries, but in Sydney August was like the wettest it's been in over 25 years. We had pretty much 3 weeks of constant rain, and so I obviously wasn't really that keen on going out and like trying to collect a bunch of shit from street libraries. So I changed the idea and instead I decided to do books that my boyfriend chose for me. I realized that I'd read 27 books this year and only 2 of them were by male authors, and I feel like that was a bit of a blind spot. Obviously people are entitled to only read whatever type of author they want to read, but for me I really love the fact that with reading you get exposed to different perspectives completely different to your own. I've read books that have taken me to so many different places, so many different time periods and through so many different experiences. I kind of realized that I had like a bit of a double standard because I feel like if a male told me that he only read male authors I would find that a little bit jarring, but then if I'm only reading female authors, yeah, I guess it just made me reflect on like my own reading practices. My boyfriend reads a lot of philosophy and he reads a lot of fantasy, and those are 2 genres that I typically really stand pretty far away from. I thought it'd be an interesting thing to do, and it was. So the first book that I read this month was this book, At Night All Blood is Black by David Diop. At Night All Blood is Black is the story of 2 Senegalese soldiers who are fighting in the First World War on the side of the French army. When one of them is killed in battle, it triggers a descent into madness for the other. The book is written in a really unique style. He uses the same phrases over and over. I feel like the repetition that he uses, it gives it like this kind of fever dream quality. It feels very claustrophobic, so he'll grab certain phrases and words and just loop and loop and loop. It feels like you're just trapped in his head and he's kind of on this downward spiral, out of control. He can't even control his own thoughts, which I feel like is a really interesting way to approach a book about war. I'm going to read a little passage to explain what I mean. But I refused. I refused. I'm sorry, my friend, my more than brother, not to have listened to you with my heart. I know, I understand. I shouldn't have turned my mind towards the blue-eyed enemy from the other side. I know, I understand. I shouldn't have been thinking about the vengeance demanded by my brain, worried by your tears, seated by your cries when you weren't even dead yet. It's got a lot of philosophical questionings of war and suffering and death, spirituality, masculinity. It really taps into the sense of futility with war. This book reminded me of a course that I did last year for psychology. Basically it was talking about the history of psychiatry, and it talked about how in the First World War, obviously so many soldiers returned home with shell shock, which is now called PTSD. They thought that it was like somehow someone's interior, their personality, they must have had a weak constitution, and that's what meant that they developed PTSD or shell shock. In the Second World War, they tried to screen out for people who would have that predisposition, but they screened out all of these people and they still had so many people return home with shell shock and PTSD. So what seems obvious to us now, but wasn't so obvious to these people back then, was that it isn't that people are being sent to war and developing PTSD and shell shock because of a prior kind of interior weakness. It's that war is such a crazy making place that you can't send a person into that situation and expect them to come out unscathed. The descent into madness that he goes on, it's just this demonic mess, kind of tangled web of seeking revenge, seeking justice for his murdered friends. One of the things that I think is interesting about this book is that he gives the fallen soldier so the protagonist's best friend, gives that character the same surname that the author has, which I thought was really interesting, and I don't know if there's a deeper meaning, but I picked up on that. I feel like this is one of the most interesting books that I have ever read, and I would highly recommend it, but don't expect it to be like any kind of war book you've ever read before. I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars, and so did my boyfriend. So the next book that I read in August was Under a White Sky, Can We Save the Natural World in Time by Elizabeth Kolbert. Under a White Sky is a non-fiction account of the climate crisis and the many ways, successful and unsuccessful, that people are trying to manage it. The book begins talking about the species of carp, and it begins talking about the Mississippi River, trying to prevent this species of carp from getting into other areas in the river because they're concerned that it will endanger native animals and plants. It kind of uses this as a starting point for a deeper discussion about how humans fuck up natural ecosystems, and then with those fuck ups you get thrown into a situation where it's like, okay, well, do we keep pushing with this fuck up, or do we try and fix it and potentially fuck it all up in a different way? Do we just keep throwing money at this? Do we make some radical tech invention that seems completely unfeasible but could work for who knows how long? And she looks at these issues, like the carp one, from so many different perspectives. She looks at it from the locals' perspective, the government's perspective. She looks at it from tech investors and business people's ideas. She goes to many different places. She comes to Australia, she goes to Mississippi, she goes to Iceland, she goes to Switzerland. I think something that this book does really well is it takes these huge, overwhelming ideas about the climate crisis and takes it into these smaller, more manageable case study examples. I feel like this ability to get so many different perspectives on the same issues is summed up in these photos on page 78. Totally different opposing ideas about the very same issue. The complexity of this is huge, and she manages to make it feel a lot more manageable by just focusing on these very small slices of this much broader, terrifying issue. I ended up giving this one 4 out of 5 stars, and so did my boyfriend. So the next book that I read in August was this book, Red Rising by Pierce Brown. It's a trilogy, but I only read the first one. Red Rising follows this young man called Darrow, and he lives in a society with a caste system based on colours, which is a very thinly veiled metaphor, obviously. The reds are the lowest caste and the golds are the highest caste, and the reds are told that they are moving to Mars to mine underground to get enough minerals so that Mars can sustain the Earth's population, and then the Earth is going to move over to Mars. That's kind of the premise for the book. Now I'm going to get into a lot of fucking spoilers, so if you want to avoid spoilers for this book, skip ahead to this time. This book is very reliant on the fact that we as an audience have no idea how this world works. We have no idea. We're learning pretty much everything through the perspective of the main character, which I actually didn't enjoy, because I really like in a fantasy book or a dystopian book where there is a really well thought out world that is presented to us. We get to kind of have this great overview of it, understand it, and then we understand why this world doesn't work and why our protagonist, probably relying on many of the tropes of the genres, wants to take it down or heal it or save it or whatever. This book is not like that, because this book wants us to know absolutely jack shit. Anytime that there is an issue in the chapter, at the end of the chapter there's going to be some hidden plot device, some hidden solution that we as an audience had no idea about that's going to swoop in and save the day. The first surprise of the book is when we find out, I can't remember, maybe 3 to 5 chapters in, that the Reds who are underground mining Mars are actually being lied to, and Mars has already been populated by all of the golds. That was a great surprise. I actually felt shocked by that one. Didn't expect it at all, and that was the last time that I felt really truly surprised, because from that point onwards, as a reader, I just kind of expected that anytime there was a problem, a magical solution was going to appear that apparently made sense, but as an audience member, I wasn't really privy to it making sense until it was being employed to save the day. On page 315, after a situation happens with a rival camp with 150, 200 pages to go, the author writes, "We never find out what happened to the Oathbreakers or our cave." We never find out what happened. How do you know that? How do you know that? If you know you never find out what happened, even before all the time has passed in which you don't find out what happened, you're basically telling me that you have some kind of knowledge of the plot beyond what I know as the reader, when I'm supposed to be reading this through the perspective of Darrow, who's supposed to know shit all. It just really took me out, because the fact that he says we never find out what happened, it's like, if you know that I'm not gonna find out, there's other stuff that you're not telling me. That ends up being really frustrating, because that just means the author can put in whatever he likes as kind of a plot solution. Another thing that I didn't love about this book, writing of female characters. There are really only 2 female characters in the book who have any depth whatsoever, and the first one is killed within the first 10 chapters, and then the second one, she's kind of just there when the protagonist needs her to nurse him back to health, or like to give him a kiss at the end of a successful battle. All other female characters in the book are pretty much just there to be sexually assaulted, which just gets tired after a while. It just gets tired. I feel like because I don't read a lot of male authored or male centered fantasy, I don't really read books where the female characters are just there to get sexually assaulted to tell the audience what a terrible society it is and how depraved everybody in this fictional society is. It just felt a little bit lazy, like I already know the society sucks. And I think that, you know, it could have been made a little bit more valid if there were still enough complex female characters to make the sexual assault feel non-tokenistic, but it just doesn't, because there aren't enough well fleshed out, well thought out female characters, so it does just feel completely skewed. Pretty much everyone that the main character interacts with heavily is a man. Because if there is a female on the page, she's probably about to get sexually assaulted. Or she's about to be almost sexually assaulted and then saved, so that our main character can be a hero about that, or feel good about that, or we can be told how great he is for saving her. One strong female character, please. In terms of the actual writing quality, it oscillates very much between being really well written and then also just being kind of cringy, and sometimes in the same page. So for example, I really liked this line on page 183. Mist blankets all, even the thick forests that lie like homespun quilts over the foothills. But then literally a page later, I am a sheep wearing wolves' clothing in a pack of wolves, which that just is like kind of a cringe line to me. It's just cringe. So sometimes within just a few pages or a few paragraphs, the writing quality really swings from poles. In saying all of that, which I know I just said a whole bunch of negatives, I did enjoy the book, particularly the final third of the book. I feel like things started really picking up, things started getting really engaging. I liked the plot development, I liked the character alliances. I feel like he did a good job of making secondary characters and peripheral characters feel real, except for the female ones. I also think that the overall messages of the book, anti-fascism, anti-racism, anti-nepotism, I feel like those are really good messages. This book is definitely reminiscent of lots of other YA dystopian books, especially The Hunger Games. I saw a lot of people making comparisons of this book to The Hunger Games. I personally feel like The Hunger Games was a lot better, but I know many people disagree. And I do honestly think if I had read this book maybe 10 years ago and went into it with more of like a fun book mindset instead of like a serious book mindset, maybe I would have liked it more. It is one of my boyfriend's favorite books. I ended up giving this book 3.5 stars on Goodreads. Do I think it would be a great book that a lot of people would love? Yes. On Goodreads it has a 4.27, so my rating was actually quite low. I rambled on about it a lot because I was trying to like justify it in my head, but at the end of the day I just think this book just wasn't for me. Okay, so that covers all of the books that I read that were recommended to me by my boyfriend. 2 of them were great success, 1 of them not so much. But now let's get into the other books that I read this month. So the first one was this children's book that my sister brought home. It's called Suffragette, The Battle for Equality by David Roberts. This was actually so fucking interesting. It's a children's book, but I would say it's more like mid-level. Like, I'm really bad at judging what age a book is appropriate for. Can't actually say with any certainty what age this one is good for, but it is a book that talks about the history of women's voting rights, which I actually feel like I didn't know very much about, and so this was super informative for me and really educational. The pictures are also really cute. Learning about women's history is so important. I do think that voting rights are a privilege that we do tend to take for granted, especially in Australia where you have compulsory voting, so from the age of 18, it's just something that you have to do. Learning about the fact that it is a privilege, that it's something that people fought for with so much passion and for such a long time. I don't know, it was just really fascinating to me, and I feel like it was something that I didn't have a lot of prior knowledge of. I ended up giving this book 4 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. So the final book that I want to talk about, the final book that I read in August was for my book club. I'm in a small book club of about like 10 girlfriends, and I did not choose this book. Other people chose this book. Other people voted on this book. I wanted to do Cleopatra and Frankenstein, but no. Instead we did Bride. How to discuss this book? The premise of Bride is that there is a world where vampires, werewolves, and humans all coexist. Humans don't necessarily know about vampires and werewolves. Some of them do, some of them don't, but they're all living in society. Werewolves and vampires have been at war for like 500 years or some really extremely long period, and they are going to have a diplomatic marriage to... This is so dumb. They're gonna have a diplomatic marriage. There's a vampire leader and his daughter is getting married to the werewolf alpha. Vampires and werewolves have never mixed. They don't marry. They hate each other. The first half of this book is setting up the plot and the characters and the past histories. The second half of the book is filled with smut that I can't even articulate how off-putting it was to me personally. Now, in my book club, it was a pretty even split of people who loved the book and people who hated the book. I was on the side of the people who hated the book. I think it was a combination of things. Like, the writing quality was very like leave your brain at the door, kind of almost Wattpad style. I'm not really a romantasy girly. I'm more of a literary fiction girl. The writing style was off-putting to me. And then the second problem was the actual content of the book. I can get around vampires, I can get around werewolves. I loved Twilight. This, especially the smut, it was teaching me things about werewolf anatomy that I simply did not need to know, did not care to know. I will say one of the ways I went wrong with Bride was I tried to listen to the audiobook, which is the most disgusting audiobook I have ever encountered, and I'm going to play a tiny little snippet of it because I think I need to just play it so people can understand how horrific it is.
Or a drawer full of Wi-Fi cards accompanied by a Hallmark greeting card. Help yourself, misery. Not a set of pencils and a sketch pad. I frown, picking it up and opening it, gently pulling the pages apart to avoid...
Like, that is the most cringe-worthy voice I've ever heard in my life. When I switched to reading it, at least I didn't have to listen to that, but the actual book was not much better. So, 0 stars. Okay, you know what? That's unfair. Half a star for Bride. Half a star. I want everybody to be aware it does have a 3.99 star rating on Goodreads. So I am in the minority here. Yeah. And that's all I'm going to say about Bride because I don't want to waste too much time talking about that. Okay, so that was everything that I read in August. I hope you enjoyed. I hope that it was entertaining or interesting. I read some really weird shit this month and yeah, I had a good time.